This week, world leaders gathered in Washington to discuss Ukraine's future. Security guarantees, potential peace deals, and the pressure on Kyiv dominate the headlines. To break it all down, we have Peter Dickinson, British journalist, editor of UkraineAlert at the Atlantic Council, and publisher of Business Ukraine magazine. Peter, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join you.
Peter, let's start with yesterday's meeting in Washington. From your perspective, how close, if at all, did these talks bring us to potential agreement between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I don't think they brought us much closer, to be honest. I don't want to be pessimistic. I think the meeting was valuable in many ways, but we're still a long way from peace. I think what yesterday was all about, this meeting in the White House, was all about demonstrating unity amongst the Western leaders, within the democratic world, within the free world, and sort of demonstrating to the Russians that they're not going to succeed in dividing the West, in separating America from Europe, or in separating America and Europe from Ukraine, or any of these other sort of divide and conquer tactics that the Russians are quite openly engaging in. So it was really, that was the first, I think, the main objective, to demonstrate that there's still a unity of purpose within the Western camp, and that Donald Trump in particular is still committed to the basic idea of maintaining sort of basic principles of international law, let's say. And in that sense, it succeeded. Beyond that, I think we're looking. It becomes more difficult to speak about specific results.
Would you call this meeting a success for Ukraine, especially compared to previous high-level meetings Zelensky has had in Washington?
Well, if we compare it to his last high-level meeting in Washington, it was extremely successful. Yeah, the tone was obviously completely different. Everybody commented on that. Everybody noticed that. Of course, last time he was in Washington in February, it was an unprecedented disaster. It was actually, I think it was a meeting that almost nobody had ever seen anything like it in their lives. Seasoned journalists said we've never seen anything as undiplomatic, as disastrous as that meeting. So it really could only have got better for Zelensky, but it did get better. He did a lot better. He'd obviously prepared well. I think him and Trump have developed a certain rapport over the last 6 months. They've met a number of times. They've met at various summits, on the sidelines at NATO, in the Vatican for the funeral of the Pope, and so on. So they've had a chance to sort of engage here and there. I think it's clear that they are personally getting on a little bit better. They're getting to know each other a little bit better. Trump's position is changing as well. He's becoming more familiar with the realities of the war. He's learning a lot more about what Putin is really all about and what Putin's war aims are all about. So altogether, yeah, it was a much better meeting in terms of the optics for Ukraine. It demonstrates that there is a good working relationship between America and Ukraine, between the Trump administration and Zelensky and his team. So they're all specific positives, I think, I would take out of the meeting.
Now there is also growing speculations about a possible bilateral meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Putin. To many, I think it's almost unimaginable given Putin's war crimes, the ongoing killing of Ukrainians, and the fact that he has openly called Zelensky illegitimate. Do you see such a meeting as realistic in any way?
No, I don't think it's going to happen at all. And I think that this is what this meeting yesterday is really all about. What we're all about now is not ending the war, but demonstrating to President Trump that Russia is the obstacle to ending the war. The goal here is not to actually immediately move to a peace deal. The goal is to demonstrate to Trump and to convince him and his team, to convince them that the obstacle to peace is Putin and is Russia. And if we want to get to peace, the Americans have no choice, really. They have no alternative but to apply a lot more pressure on Russia. So one of the ways, of course, to do that now is to propose a meeting. Now, I imagine we'll see in the next few days, the Russians will say, oh, of course, we're not opposed to a meeting, but we can't do it now, or whatever excuse they want to use. But they will not agree under almost any circumstances to having that bilateral meeting between Putin and Zelensky. So that will be a very strong signal to the West and to Trump in particular that Putin's the problem here. Of course, it's not. Of course, it's deeply, deeply unpleasant and troubling for Zelensky, the idea of sitting down with Putin, given the war crimes that Putin is responsible for, given what he's done in Ukraine. That will be an extremely traumatic experience, I suppose is another word for it, for Zelensky. Extremely difficult emotional step to take, and very damaging, I think, in terms of or very angering for the Ukrainian people if they were to see Zelensky and Putin. But I think Zelensky's made a calculated gamble here. He knows well if he can meet with Putin and he can solve the war, that's a price worth paying. But I would imagine he's estimating here. He's sort of banking on the fact that Putin's going to say no. And when Putin says no to the meeting, that's a very strong signal to Trump that Putin's the problem and it's time to increase pressure on the Russians.
Let's talk about Trump's Alaska meeting with Putin. U.S. President said Ukraine should strike a deal with Moscow, even hinted U.S. aid could stop if it doesn't happen. And now feels like all the pressure is landing on Kyiv instead of Moscow.
Well, that was the mood on Friday. Then on Monday, the mood changed entirely. So you've got to be very careful what Trump says, reading too much into today's comments. Tomorrow, we'll have a different message. Maybe on Thursday, there'll be a new message again. He fluctuates a lot. Just before the meeting with Zelensky at the White House on Monday, Trump sent out a social media post talking about how Zelensky could grab peace if he just makes concessions, if he hands over Crimea. And as far as I'm aware, Crimea wasn't even mentioned in the subsequent meeting. And it was agreed afterwards that any territorial concessions or agreements or realities would be agreed directly between Russia and Ukraine and nobody else. So, Trump is someone who likes to make very bold statements. He seems to be very easily swayed by whoever he's spoken to most recently. And I think we've got to be careful reading too much into each of his comments and sort of jumping and changing positions and changing analysis on what his most recent proclamation may have been. I think we need to look at the bigger picture here. The bigger picture remains that Russia does not want peace at the moment, that Russia is not under enough pressure yet to seek peace. And so the big objective here has to be to persuade Trump, first of all, to apply that pressure onto Russia. How are we going to get there? So one way of getting there, I think, that certainly Zelensky seems to understand, and I believe the European leadership also understands very well, is to flatter Trump, to encourage Trump to feel like the leader of the free world, and to show that they are willing to work with him and to accommodate him and his vision for peace in order to expose the reality, which is that Putin doesn't want peace. That's where they're trying to get to, and that's where they understand they need to get to. So I think, that's where we're headed. Trump will come out with alarming statements on a regular basis if the past 6 months is anything to go by, and I think we need to keep focused on the big picture.
The media outlets have called the Alaska summit a diplomatic win for Putin, saying he managed to break out of political isolation. But then the working lunch and follow-up meetings were suddenly called off. So was it really a win for him or more of a setback?
No, it was certainly a victory. It was certainly a victory for him in terms of the visuals, in terms of the symbolism. Putin is a wanted war criminal. Putin is wanted by the International Criminal Court in The Hague for war crimes specifically. He is unable to attend summits of his own alliances. He was not able to attend the BRICS summit, the annual BRICS summit in South Africa 2 years ago. He was not able to attend the annual BRICS summit in Brazil just last month. So he is a wanted war criminal. That is a major issue for him. It's very uncomfortable, very embarrassing, and it has practical implications for how he can travel around the world. He is someone also who's been unable to travel to a lot of Western countries. He doesn't feel welcome now. But all of a sudden, he's able to get this, not just a visit to America, but the absolute red carpet treatment. Now, some people have speculated it's been reported, or I've not seen it confirmed, that the nature of this red carpet treatment for Putin was specifically demanded by the Kremlin as part of their terms to agree to this summit in America. I would imagine that Trump was probably quite happy to provide it because he likes that kind of thing, and he is an admirer of dictators. That's no secret. So I think from a Russian point of view, the summit itself did not produce any particularly big results. On the contrary, as you say, the lunch was cancelled, the press conference was very, very brief, the second part of the meetings were cancelled. It didn't produce the diplomatic results that they may have hoped for, but it did produce the visuals that they were craving. The Russians were absolutely desperate to have that visual, to have Trump meeting Putin on the red carpet, and they've run with that ever since. That was an absolute gold mine for the Kremlin propaganda machine, and they will continue to use that, I think, as a really significant victory.
At the Alaska meeting, Putin also invited Trump to visit Moscow, and today Russian Foreign Ministry confirmed this invitation. And after years of killing and after clear isolation violation, I would say, of international law, can Russia really just step out of this isolation and go back to business as usual?
No, Russia will never go back to business as usual as long as Putin is in power. Let's not conflate diplomatic niceties and diplomatic etiquette and protocol for actual business as usual. Russia, as long as Vladimir Putin is in power in Moscow, there will never be business as usual between him and the Western world. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's possible. There might be some thaw, some normalization of relations, but we'll never get back to where we were in 2006 or even 2012, 2013 before Crimea, even going back to, say, 2020 before the full-scale invasion. Those days are gone, and we'll never get back to that sort of position. But dialogue with Putin will continue, I think, now. Trump has now set a new precedent. He's normalized that to a degree. He may want to go further himself. He's talked about, as well as having a Zelensky-Putin meeting, he's talked about having a trilateral where he would also take part. Again, I don't think that's going to happen, but he might have another bilateral. He might feel that it's worth his while to go to Moscow and see if he can push the issue further there. He may decide that that's something he'd like to do. We shall see. But I don't think we should talk here in terms of a complete normalization or a return to business as usual. I don't think that's a realistic prospect for as long as Putin's in power.
Let's also talk about security guarantees. Many Ukrainians still remember the Budapest Memorandum promises that were broken when Russia invaded years later. Are there any guarantees today that can actually be trusted to protect Ukraine in a long run?
Well, the fundamental issue here that we always have to come back to again and again when we talk about security guarantees is quite simple. Will the West fight Russia on Ukraine's behalf? That's really what we're talking about here. That's what it all. We can talk in great detail about the different military aspects of this, the different triggers that could be used, the type of troops that could be deployed, the terms and conditions. But fundamentally, we have to ask: will Western governments fight Russia? Will they go to war with Russia on Ukraine's behalf? Now, call me cynical, but I'm inclined to say no, they will not do that. I find it very, very difficult to imagine any scenario where the Prime Minister of Great Britain or the President of France or any other European leader, never mind the President of America, would say, okay, we're going to war with Russia because the Russians are attacking Kramatorsk again, or because the Russians are pushing into Kyiv Oblast, or whatever it may be. I think that's not a realistic scenario. So we need to be very clear about what we're really talking about here in terms of security guarantees. That is the fundamental issue we need to address. And if we can't provide that level of security for Ukraine, then what can the West really provide? What are we talking about here? I think the only really credible security guarantee the West can provide is to commit to maintaining a very strong, well-armed, well-equipped and fully supplied Ukrainian military, because that's the Ukrainian army is Ukraine's security guarantee, and it will remain so for decades to come. Of course, all support from Western countries is very welcome, but we shouldn't live under any illusions here. We shouldn't delude ourselves and think that Western countries are going to come into Ukraine and fight on Ukraine's behalf, because frankly, they're not. It's very unlikely that could happen in any scenario, and I don't think it would be in anyone's interests to maintain that sort of fantasy. It's not going to happen. So we need to look at what the realities are. I think the most realistic scenario is a very strong Ukrainian military with a very, very steady and guaranteed long-term support from the West in terms of material support, arms, weapons, technologies, joint projects to strengthen Ukraine's industrial defense base. So manufacturing of weapons in Ukraine, long-range missiles are very important here to be able to strike deep inside Russia as a deterrent to Russian attacks on Ukraine. Drones, of course, increased strengthening of the front lines and fortifications. The one area where I think we could talk about a direct Western military involvement would be in the air. I think it's possible, although it would again take a lot of discussion and a lot of military planning. It's possible to have some sort of an air shield over at least part of Ukraine, along the lines of what we've seen in terms of Israel over the last year or so, where a number of Western countries, including Britain, France, and America, have provided air support cover to shoot down missiles and drones fired by Iran at Israel, and they've done so very successfully. And that's not resulted in any escalation with Iran. I think that it would be possible to apply those lessons and perform a similar service or similar function over at least part of Ukrainian airspace, maybe West Ukraine, maybe West and Southern and Central Ukraine up to Kyiv, up to the Dnieper River, covering Odessa in the south, of course, or all of West. And that would provide a significant degree of air cover for Ukraine, which would be very good in terms of allowing people to come back to the country to feel safer, allowing refugees to return, allowing investment to happen with the greatest certainty of security, allowing business to thrive, manufacturing to develop, and so on and so forth, without putting the West into a position where they might come into direct conflict with Russia. You can shoot down missiles and drones without coming into direct conflict with Russia. Whereas if there's troops on the ground, they get fired upon, they fire back, we have World War III. And that's something the West isn't going to do. But maybe with the air they could. That's the one area where I can see realistically the West being involved. Apart from that, when we talk about security guarantees, I think what we're really talking about is strengthening for the Ukrainian military and support for the Ukrainian military from the West.
Thanks, Peter. It's clear that there is a lot of happening behind the scenes, and we'll be keeping an eye on how things develop.